welcome everybody to WDYT. What do you think? So we felt, even though we went a little long last week, that we really needed to get a little longer time with Andrew and with Paige. We're sorry we can't have Matthew, but we felt like with 5, it was just more than we could really fit in and keep it flowing smooth. So we're going to try it this way, and we have promised Matthew his own time, maybe early in December. We have both bought his book, and we're going to read the book, and then we're going to talk to Matthew about his book, Saying No to God. So is that all right? We hope, we're a little bit sad, but we just felt like we've got to make it work. So anyway, we're going to start. You want to have a prayer for us, Jim? Let's launch in.
Sure. Father, here we are. We just want to be real. We want to listen. We want to share where it's appropriate as we try to understand what your Spirit is doing, how you talk to each of us differently. So give us ears to hear. Amen.
Okay, well, I don't know exactly how we should begin. We have talked about it. We want to be sure that we hear your most important concern. That was first thing. We talked about environmental, climate control kinds of issues, sort of social justice kinds of things. We've talked about, a ministry. How do we do things in the community? You talked about your idea of having a exercise and workout and outdoor ministry church. Anyway, we heard a variety of things that we've talked about. If you had to just say, what is the most important thing? If all of a sudden you had the microphone and the world leaders were listening, you say, we really need this. If you don't hear anything else I say, we want you to hear this. Do you know what that is? Can you speak to that?
Andrew.
I think if Adventism formulated a theology on climate and climate change, ecology, I think that is the most pressing issue for the world at large, and so is the most valuable if Adventism was to pioneer there.
So that would be really, really very close or at the top.
Yeah, for me, I think so. But I have fear that the world is ending and Adventist apocalypse is coming true. So
would you agree with that, Paige? You were the one that brought that up last time.
Yeah, I think that I would make my one thing more broad. So just a general openness to the world and to other worldviews and to science, especially. Growing up in the church, there was not a fear of science, but definitely, when we're watching Animal Planet, some of the stuff that we hear is going to be false. And I think that plays a lot into why a lot of people in the church don't really care about issues of climate change and things like that, because ultimately this world is not our home. I'm just a passing by, and the real goal is to get to heaven. So I think by expanding, just having an open view to other views and to other disciplines, in that way it can open us up to, like Andrew's saying, the climate, or to
particularly about climate change. Are you thinking about creation, evolution, other kinds of things too?
That's what I'm saying, is it's a general openness to everything.
And
it's not just one thing. It's a whole shift in how we approach the world. Remember last time how we talked about orthodoxy and how that kind of gets in the way of a lot of creativity within the church. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is this lack of creative, open perspective to the world. So that would include opening people's minds up to science, And yeah, evolution, if that's important to you personally, that's not up there for me. Being open to talking about politics and other things. So it's not one thing. It's just an openness to talking about all different kinds of things, and maybe a recognition of how all those things out in the world are interconnected. So if we talk about climate change, it's going to lead us to talk about other things like poverty and hungry, and you know, everything is interconnected and interrelated.
Adventists would claim that our persona is progressive revelation, right? You've heard that. That we're always open to revising. It's in the Gray Bill preamble to our fundamental beliefs, is that this is what we think today, but we're open to better ways of saying it, better ideas, bigger ideas, more truthful ideas. Do you feel like that's not true, that we're not living up to that, or that that was only for our fundamental beliefs, but not other areas? I mean, somewhere you've gotten the idea that we're pretty close to some fields of knowledge.
Yeah, so I think it depends what kind of space that we're talking about. So for me, if it's at somewhere like La Sierra, then I don't think that the Adventist understanding at La Sierra University is closed-minded at all. Like, no, like I am a huge advocate for the School of Religion at La Sierra. I am still friends with my professors, and that's where Andrew and I met, and love La Sierra. If you are talking about my home church per se, there is that I don't want to put words into like my pastor's mouths, but there's no urgency to, you know, challenge the status quo or even like a desire necessarily. Just this is what we do, and we don't need to be talking about like relevant issues. So it depends what kind of Adventist space you're in. That's what I'm saying.
So you were pretty happy with the La Sierra stance to the world.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love La Sierra.
But it's not what else you have experienced everywhere else.
Yeah, but don't you think that's okay?
So let me just jump in and say, if I hear you correctly, Paige, La Sierra is not clearly accepted or reflected in most churches.
Yeah.
And from where I've been, and I'm not a La Sierra grad, nor have I lived in Southeastern California, La Sierra is largely looked at with big question marks. And, you know, they're kind of woo-woo out there.
Huh.
And I can confirm it. It's amazing. It's great.
People told me when I left Chicago, you will not be able to raise your kids in Southern California. Everybody's sleeping with everybody. They're all drinking wine. They're all at the mall on Sabbath. You can't move to that place. We've been here 26 years. We love it here. But yeah.
Even with people going to the mall on Saturday?
I'm sorry?
Even with people going to the mall?
I don't follow them around to know about it. So, so Ellen White says we should not be afraid of questions. Ellen White says over and over again, we have much to learn and much to unlearn. She talks about that she learned constantly for 60 years. Where did we lose that?
I think that is a question that maybe you or Jim could speak to. You guys have had like long histories in the church, and you both have a lot of experience that, you know, I've never pastored anywhere. I've never been a conference president. What do you guys think?
Jim, you want to take a shot at that? Where did closeness come from?
Well, let me attempt a very short answer to a complex issue, and that is following Ellen White's death, and then very clearly, if you've read the 1919 Bible conferences, in which Paige Daniels attempted to be open and relevant. And the reaction was to shut down, create the myth of Ellen White, and stone anybody who disagreed with the narrative that was voted.
And
so,
buried the minutes for what, 50, 60 years?
Say that again?
Buried the minutes from the meeting for 50 or 60 years.
Absolutely. Okay. And so I talk about neo-Andreasenism now, but Andreasenism then put this pall on the church, which destroyed independent thinking. You had to line up. It's the Adventist version of McCarthyism, and still is. Okay. And if you are not a perfectionist, if you're not a last generation, you're not really an Adventist. And, you know, as I have tried to say to people, there are different streams of Adventism. Boy, as being a conference president, no longer could I send any pastor to any church. I had to find a conservative to go to a conservative church and a progressive to go to a progressive church, or their tenure was very short.
What did you do with the young pastor who asked some questions? Did you foster that and say that, or did you say, you want to survive in that church, you better shut up?
All my young pastors will tell you very clearly, yes, I covered their back. Okay. And I said, yes, you have to keep asking questions. Yes. Now, please be careful who you talk to and how you bring that into the discussion. Because if you go too far too fast, your saints can't handle it. And so very clearly, if you look at what happened to me and getting voted out of office, I went too far too fast. I don't back up an inch on any of those issues. I would do it again, but this is because Adventism is on this cross path where the progressives are diminishing and the conservatives are going up. Okay. And so we have this whole evolution within the Adventist church that I grew up in, that I don't recognize the church nowadays. It certainly does not reflect what I'm passionate about. And I find myself going, you know, I had to tell my friend Tom Lemon when I was talking to him the other day, you know, the GC makes policies and I don't care. I'm no longer angry. I'm no longer concerned. I just don't care, because they do not reflect what I think is important at the local church level. And that is to know Jesus. Now that's my question back to you guys, okay? I hear you talk, but I don't hear you talk about radical discipleship, radical Jesus followers. I hear you talking about what is, you know, a code word, social justice issues, which are good. And so my question to you is the church not able to create a safe place where you can discuss this, or are you being specifically put down and told, oh, you're so young, you don't know what you're talking about? When in fact, you do know what your generation does concern them, and that you are reflecting how your generation thinks. And the church does need to listen and embrace a wider openness to the various discussions. Which is it? Because when I don't hear you talk about Jesus and being radical disciples, I go, ouch, oh boy. Okay. I don't know how to relate.
So, and can you get his question? Can you answer that? One of you, both of you?
Yeah. I'll go first, but I would also be interested in hearing what Andrew has to say. To me, being a disciple means to be concerned with issues like social justice and the climate. When I look at the kind of life that Jesus lived, he was with the outsider, the other, the oppressed, the people that the majority, the people in power, didn't want to acknowledge or associate with. And so to me, these things, you know, that Andrew and I keep bringing up, these relevant issues, is exactly what Jesus was doing and would want us to continue doing. when I had sent that email out a couple days ago about possible like ways that we could take this next episode, and I mentioned, oh, like talking about the election would be one idea because it's what our country is going through right now. Um, and, I got the sense that no, probably we don't want to talk about politics in this episode. That's not really where we're at right now, which is totally fine. But I think that those are the things that one matter to at least me, and I know others my age who, those things do matter. And two, it matters to people who are um, on the margins of society, and we if you're going to call yourself a Christian and a true follower of Christ, you have to be engaging not only those people but how to help them. My main issue, I guess, with traditional Christianity is this focus of um, the cross and resurrection as this thing that happens later. So salvation and liberation is something that is going to happen in the future. The second coming it's the second coming. It hasn't happened yet. But I think what we forget a lot of the times is that Jesus, throughout his whole life, was bringing salvation and liberation to the people around him. And maybe that is what should be at the forefront, not this, trying to save souls or baptize people or get our numbers up in the church, but really to quite literally follow Jesus's steps and to help transform and bring salvific liberation, transformation, whatever, right now. So yeah, sorry, I kind of talked for a lot.
That's good.
Go ahead, Jim.
I want to hear
I
Andy.
want to ask, so when we ask you what's most important, you don't say, I think we should be disciples of Jesus, and that means this. Is that because you assume the disciple of Jesus and doesn't need to be said?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why that's not said, because we're waiting to hear that. When you would ask us what is most important, we would talk about Jesus first. And then this would lead me to be involved in the election. I absolutely care about voting as a Christian. I put that in a sermon today. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus has to affect your voting and how you think about the political process. Yes, I believe that. And if you want to talk about that, I am game. But we do that from Jesus. You're okay with that?
Yes. I think the problem, though, with, or not necessarily the problem, but it's really easy to fall into the trap of just saying, being a follower of Jesus, stop, and sentence. And to so many people, that can mean many different things. For some people, it's just, being a follower of Jesus. And, I read my Bible every day and I go to church once a week. And, that's kind of like it. But I think because it's not something that I've necessarily thought of, like when someone asks me what is really important to me about the church, I'm not going to talk about, or I'm not going to actually mention being a disciple of Jesus. I'm going to talk about these things. Like that hasn't really, it's like a subconscious thing. But I think that it's the practice that's really important, I guess, like the emphasis of this is what it means to be a Christian, essentially, like what you were saying.
I agree with that. I mean, I had DACA kids in my church.
Good.
Beautiful, precious, loving people I love with all my heart. And the fact that they had to hide and they were saving up money so that if they got deported, they could survive, because now the government knows who they are. I mean, Jesus has a lot to say to me about that.
Yeah.
And I will never vote for anybody that isn't for giving the DACA people status, and let them be okay in our country. They're here. They've been here 30 years, So I fully believe that Jesus' discipleship means, and I say those things and believe. I would have sponsored them all in our church if it had been up to me, but there's some other people that had to do with the budget. You want to say something, Andrew? We haven't brought you in here yet.
Yeah, I just want to affirm Paige and what she said. I think you are tempering us healthfully in that as very cerebral individuals, sometimes we fail to talk about Jesus and the emotion and the heart of following Jesus. Certainly, I think both of us agree that following Jesus is the heart of being a Christian, and it's totally appropriate to couch all of these conversation points in that reality, that following Jesus inspires you to vote accordingly to Christian principles or morality, or with social justice issues in mind, or being a Christian it doesn't force helps you encounter the issues of the world. So we can do a better job of that to communicate to the church. I think that's what I'm picking up here.
So how in the world does the church engage? Because here's the challenge I have in my church. I don't know how to have the discussion with my church members because they are so at odds, and both of them think they are fully Christian, but their values are divergent to the point of, I've just said, stop. Okay? But I agree with you. Jesus's core values are radical. They are embracing all kinds of people that are thrown out by Roman society, by all kinds of methods. But what happens so subtly in so many churches is what I call spiritual abuse, in which, and this is, you can say, well, then that's the reason I don't talk about Jesus, is we use God talk to try and browbeat and condemn you for thinking in any way other than how the church has voted already. What? Don't you trust the brethren? What? How dare you ask this question? How dare you think outside the box? And I have been challenged. Jim, don't you trust the brethren to run the church? And I have said, if they want to run the church, fine. But where are they taking it? And what are the issues? What's important? Because one of the questions I'll ask you is, what are the values of the Adventist Church? What are the core values? Which is one of the things I think that Paige is getting at. What are the core values of what makes a disciple of Jesus Christ? Okay? And we don't have those defined. Therefore, everybody gets to go every different direction, and we have this mess. And I frankly say the core values of the church are power, turf, and control. And
One more time, Jim, the last thing.
Power, turf, and control. You just look at the size of the NAD manual. You just look at what we talk about and what we report. We report tithe. What we talk about is who's getting elected, blah, 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 blah. And I go, wait a minute. That is not what Jesus is about.
Jim, I want to piggyback on what you're saying. I agree with you. I think I like the pithy saying of power, turf, and control. I think that's fun. Some of that I think even extends into the way we've formulated our discussions in this podcast, right? One of the questions that we've been encountering is, why do people of the millennial or younger generations leave the church or not affiliate with it? That's a question couched in a desire to maintain turf, power, and control. So I don't know. I think we should just be aware of that. I totally agree with what you're saying, but I maybe want to push it a little bit further.
So if you've been a pastor in there, how many years? 6, 7 years, and you've been preaching the disciple of Jesus, and their values have not changed, how do you interpret that? Or the leaders of our church, they would say they're disciples of Jesus. Why haven't their values changed if they're following Jesus?
Yeah. I mean, we can say a couple different things here. First, there's obviously the difference between walk and talk in how we affirm being disciples of Jesus. There's obviously still personal opinion in understanding different walks and different talks. it's also important to affirm the unique freedom that each individual has and God's unique way of interacting with each individual. I will never fully be able to walk in someone else's shoes. And certainly as a pastor, I have to emulate humility in not understanding everybody. Um, the position of a pastor is one of really, really important grace in trying to guide people and maybe not making what you think is too much of a headway, but that's where the church has affirmed the work of the Spirit. I don't really know how to answer that question. Um, I think if we've learned anything from this election cycle, it's that trying to argue your way to convincing someone else to change doesn't really work. I think that phenomena has been present in local church dynamics for a long, long time. I think pastors were not taken by surprise in seeing that. And yeah, preaching often doesn't. Preaching sounds a lot like the media outlets we're listening to. They're telling you what's right and what's true. And most of life change happens in the relational stuff outside of that, for like professional communication, if you will.
I think that's very insightful.
Thanks.
The whole narrative of how Adventism goes about evangelism has to move over to the relational first rather than the argumentative, because all of us have put up our blocks and we're not listening. I don't listen to any radio preachers or television preachers. I can't handle them because I don't know them. And I don't trust them because I don't know them. And so until I know you, why would I listen to you?
You see that reflected in church parishes where the pastor is unable to connect with a large portion of the congregants, people who don't connect. That's why people have favorite pastors. Is I connected to you, and so I felt like it was making a difference in my life. Church was good, and the next pastor that comes along, maybe you weren't so crazy about her, didn't like football as much as you did, so you didn't get along as well. Yeah.
I want to hear what's going to make the difference here. You know, if this is where we're at, as a radical disciple of Jesus would change the church, then what does it mean when people aren't changed? So Orangewood, Andrew taught Bible at Orangewood last year. I love this place. I love the people of that place. I poured my life into that place. But when two kids got pregnant, both coming to our church, starting to have Bible studies, the school management told them to leave, and we don't want to see your faces on campus for anything for 1 year. I challenged everybody from bottom to top on that as lovingly as I could. Principal, admin, conference superintendent, people I love and respect that are my friends. But my view of the disciple of Jesus was completely opposite of theirs. I said, these kids need support. They've got enough punishment already to have to raise this kid. And they said, if we let them be on campus, other girls will think that's cute and they should go get one too. And I said, show me where the Bible says, being a follower of Jesus says, I should tell somebody, I don't want to see you for a year. Show me that. So that's just one
really
example.
Fun at Orangewood, teaching just for a year, 2019 to 20 school year. The instance you're talking about happened in terms of high school years, generations earlier, but the legacy hangs on. And I remember being confronted about it in Bible class. Several of the kids brought up the idea that church members were afraid that if they saw an example of a pregnant teenager being accepted, they would feel that it's appropriate for them to behave that way as well. And they were like, honestly, Mr. G, that's what they would call me. They were like, and I'm paraphrasing, if we saw someone pregnant, if one of my friends got pregnant in this class, it would be very intriguing to watch them go through that. And it would be a learning experience to be with them in that. But I think if anything, watching the pressures and the stresses of a teenage pregnancy would make me not want to engage. So I
Yeah.
think the truth was exactly the opposite of what that parish concern was.
But my,
Yeah.
my point
But
is
that doesn't answer your question.
the
Yeah.
principle. Yeah, I agree with what you said, and I agree 100%. And I said that to them. But my point is the principal and the education people and the superintendents are beautiful people who I think are trying to follow Jesus. But their understanding, I have a document on my file here that people sent last week about why they are voting a particular direction because they're a Christian that is diametrically opposed to every value I have. And I don't know what to do with that.
I think for me, and I think I would extend it to Paige because of the principles that we've been espousing. We shouldn't as a church make orthodox claims about anything, because when we do, we begin to alienate people. That's the exact opposite of what Christ wanted. So I mean, we all live in this tension, and certainly people who are on the other side of the aisle or disagree with us in any number of problems or conversations, and some of us probably disagree with each other as well.
Nothing, Andrew,
it would be wrong.
Nothing we can be agreed on as orthodox.
It would be wrong for us to exclude them. I think conversations should be had, disagreements should be had, and the ideal church is a place where those can happen, to educate and not alienate.
Dan, what do you mean by orthodox? Because the minute the church votes something, stopped the conversation. Well, currently that's where we're at. Originally, we had these conversations and said, this is where we're at, and we have conversations about it. And our church manual said, this is a book of principles, not a code book. Now it's changed. So now you have to line up with the 28 fundamental beliefs. And some people would like to have us all sign documents and statements to that effect. And some of us would say, over my dead body, I'm not going there. All right. And so being orthodox is a oxymoron. Being radical in terms of following Jesus is what I think Jesus calls us to. And the reason we don't do it is because of the book Failure of Nerve, Friedman's Failure of Nerve. People have not grown up. They are emotionally not willing to risk disagreeing with the corporate church. And therefore they keep quiet and they keep their job and they get their retirement. And therefore nobody questions and calls the organization to the reality of who Jesus was and the kinds of radical stuff that Paige is talking about. And I agree with her, okay? Ortberg's book, Who is This Man?, raises all these issues that Jesus vibrantly raised. He was radical, okay? But you don't hear that out of Adventism. And in sharing that book with my congregation, they go, well, we've never heard this before.
And they were happy, or they pushed back at you?
Oh, no, they're happy. I have a wonderful church, okay? I have the best church in the denomination.
Were they wonderful when you started, or after 6 years of preaching the discipleship of Jesus?
Oh, yes, I've absolutely miraculously changed them all, don't you know? No, I inherited a great church. And the guy who was before me, dear friend, he's still here. He took him so far, and I've taken him a little further, okay? But they understand very clearly it's a discussion. I don't have all the answers. And we're trying to be radical. We're trying to ask the questions. And so the reason we're inviting you guys to talk is, what is the language of the natives? Because I don't know how to talk the language of the natives very well.
The language of the
natives. The natives are the millennials. And not the ones in the church, the ones out of the church are the natives. And what's fascinating is this Adventist church that claims to be a missiological organization is not teaching how to learn the language of the natives and take Jesus to what these two young people are saying. This is what people out there are concerned about. And if you want to talk to them eventually about Jesus, you're going to have to start with these conversations. Otherwise, they're just going to put up their hands and go, I don't know, goodbye, old man. Am I close?
Yeah, make sure you expand your sample size, though. Paige and I are very similar in our thinking and our La Sierra within Adventist slang. So,
I want to go back to what Dan, you were talking about. First, I just want to just affirm you in what you did at Orangewood. I could tell that you, even though this happened a while ago, the feelings are still very real to you. Um, it makes my stomach hurt when I see things that are what you would expect Jesus's answer would be or approach would be, and people who say that they are followers of Christ and they do the opposite. And um, I don't know. I feel for you because you are someone who really cares about the church, and you had to go through that. Um, one of a professors said there wasn't like a story or anything. It was just a generic thing that he said in class one day. But he was saying that over time, he didn't leave the church. The church left him. So at one point, there's this divide where this organization that you so love and you identify with and you believe in, it has become something else, and it's not necessarily you're leaving, it's the movement has kind of changed. And I'm not saying that you, Dan Smith, have left the church, but I'm saying that other people have experienced that too. And I don't know if those two high school girls knew that there was someone rooting for them, but I hope that they do, because that is a powerful story.
Well, thank you. I was very proud because there was a petition, online petition that
Really?
the mother organized. There were probably 200 things on it, and a lot of those were my kids and their
Good.
parents, because they had heard grace from our church. And they wrote on this statement, this does not reflect what we are hearing at our church and what we have learned about Jesus at our church. So I was really proud of
Good.
our kids who stood up and said, this is not what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, and then I also want to affirm the struggle that I see, that I mean, and we all go through this, but you were asking Jim, like, oh, and you were asking Andrew, like, what do you do as a pastor when you aren't seeing this change happen in your congregation? And you referenced a church member or someone who emailed you a couple days ago saying why they were voting for a particular candidate based on their religious convictions, and how you were kind of just taken aback by that. So I think about this a lot, and I don't know if I'm gonna like regret what I say, but I'm getting this Bible story in my mind that I heard told in a similar way on a podcast that Andrew and I listened to. But it's the story of the prodigal son. And I had never really paid much attention to that story other than what I like grew up hearing about in Sabbath school. So just, there's the son that goes out and parties, eventually comes back, is accepted by the father. But on this podcast that Andrew and I listened to, it approaches this story from the side of the brother who is so upset that his younger brother, who like threw away all of the money, is accepted by the father, and this whole feast happens. And the story ends by the father approaching the son, who is the antagonist, the guy who doesn't get it, and he says, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. And that is really powerful, because when I think about the kinds of people who would fall into that antagonist, that brother figure, I couldn't imagine God saying that to them. But it's in the Bible.
That's right.
And so I don't, to answer your question, I don't know. I don't think, even though in our ideal world, when you become a follower of Jesus, there is a radical change. But if that story is, if Jesus told that story, there's a reason for it, in that the brother who, you know, was very upset at the prodigal son, he didn't change, and yet his father was able to say, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. And so to think that Jesus can say that to the people who aren't changed is pretty radical in itself. At the same time, I feel uncomfortable because there should be a change, but sometimes there isn't. And that's hard. I don't think there's an answer.
And how to be gracious to the ungracious people.
Yeah.
But if can't do that, if I can only be gracious to the grace people, Jesus said, that's your friend. Everyone does that. The world does that. But how to be gracious to the ungracious? That shows Jesus has changed your heart along the way. Yeah, no, to become a fully committed disciple is something. Yeah. Jim, you want to come back?
No, I'm still thinking. Andrew?
Is something we can agree on across the generations, is a Jesus and a radical discipleship of Jesus. We can get together on that.
Oh, yeah.
What that means and how we do it. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, we're for it.
Yes.
So just discuss this now, but look at the one project just for discussion. Now, I wasn't in all the meetings, but obviously Sam Lenore is a pretty close friend of mine. These guys were beat to death. I mean, I took some people on myself. I watched the conference in Sacramento where the right wing put their pictures up on a screen, named them, named their schooling and everything else, and blasted away at each of them.
What church in Sacramento? Doug Batchelor's church?
Yes. It wasn't him leading it. I didn't see him on the panel, but it was
Okay.
Central Sacramento. But it was a meeting, a wide meeting, and they put all these people up there, and they went after him.
Wow.
And Sam and Tim and Japheth and all of them, at some point decided maybe this has run its course. You know, one of the great things to try to recenter Jesus in the Adventist church. And even though I went there and heard them preach a sermon about the Sabbath, they said, you're saying all that matters is Jesus and nothing else matters. That's the kind of criticism that went out about it. And these guys, who are wonderful people, finally, it just kind of withered at them. They just couldn't do it anymore. And so that's the challenge that fights you if you're going to try to center on Jesus. Look at the Pope, the pushback on the Pope for not saying gay marriage, but saying gay civil unions. And his own people from all over the world have said, you can't say that. So it takes a certain bravery to be a fully radical disciple of Jesus.
Yeah. A lot of people told Jesus that he couldn't say things.
Yes. Yes.
His family said he was crazy.
What was that?
His family said he was crazy.
Now, just, Jim, you and I had a talk when the compliance committees first came up, and there was a rumor that they were going to now come and take over our union, and they were going to make us all sign pledges. And Jim and I are talking as two old guys, and we were ready to announce to our church, next Sabbath, we're meeting at such and such a park, because we're just not going to sign like that. It didn't come to that. And I was close to retirement, but I asked some people the question, can they mess with my retirement? Do I have that in my hand, or can they mess with that? Because it's a little scary to put your whole survival, the rest of your life, on the line for what you want to stand for. just to stand, you know, I mean, I don't know if you know, Paige, I was part of the middle of the women's ordination 25 years ago at La Sierra. You know, I was a senior pastor. My name is on 2 ladies' ordination certificate. That process was beyond terrifying.
Wow.
And sitting right at this desk, I mean, I got phone calls from church leaders that were horrifying. The General Conference president sent an email that compared me and the other guy to Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and the ground opening up and swallowing them in the ground as defiant and rebellious. If I heard those words one more time, defiant and rebellious, I would stand it to hear those words said.
Dan, you didn't warn me.
What's that?
You didn't warn me.
Yes,
Oh.
you could have been with me. Did you come to that? Were you there with me?
No.
70 pastors, 70 of my friends came and signed their name on the slip so that when they came for me, they would all be with me. 70.
Amen. Amen.
Those guys are precious to me. And Herman Bauman, conference president of Arizona, the only church official in the world that came physically and knelt at the front of the church. The grand man.
Yep.
Anyway,
Andrew, you
were
had
gonna
your
say
hand
something,
up.
Andrew?
Yeah, so I have a question for you two. Both of you have been warriors on behalf of bringing the church forward, which Paige and I love and are thankful for. And you've challenged us to do the same. How would you? I guess it seems to me like the church has let you down, and so I'm wondering how and why you persist in supporting it as an institution. Why do you persist in supporting the Adventist Church as an institution? And how do you attempt to bring people to a church which has hurt you so badly? Those are my 2 questions. Why do you support it with the history you have? And how do you market the church?
All right. I'll dive in.
Go ahead, Jim.
I don't define the word church as the institution of the Adventist brand. All right. Church is the called out to come together that God always does to his kids. And my job is not to make Adventists. My job is to keep calling people into a radical relationship with Jesus Christ. So I'm creating a church of people that some of whom are Adventists and some of whom are not. I've got all kinds of different denominations at my church. And they say, you are my church, but I'm not an Adventist. Is that okay? And I say, of course it's okay. You're following Jesus. I'm following Jesus. We're good. Okay. So that's how I live with the tension. If I was trying to make an Adventist, then I would have a migraine and I would quit or I would commit suicide. I don't know. I wouldn't do that. But all right. So because it's so dysfunctional, I just say, God bless the institution. But being a disciple, I am called to call disciples to come and follow him. And he always pulls us together in groups into relationships, which is called, I believe, the church.
Wow. I do bring people to the church and do go all over the world trying to get people into the Adventist church. But I still love the church because of Jesus. You know, I say this all the time. Jesus says, I will build my church. It's his church. Ephesians 5 says, Jesus Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. He walks in the middle of it. And so I stick with the church because Jesus sticks with the church. It's very Jesus-centered. That little experience with Jim and I talking about leaving the official sanction of it was a big deal. Now I knew I had a boundary. I knew what the price would be, and I would walk. And what's interesting, I talked to my mother about it. And I think my mother would have come with my brother and me, because my brother and I talked about it. But we were going to walk if that had happened. And my mother is as Adventist as they come. They don't come any more true blue than that. So I still love the church. I still find the church doing amazing things around the world. And the vast majority of the Adventists that I am with are fantastic, godly, righteous people. I got off the plane and there are people doing work in the Philippines that they're great people. And Jesus has touched them. And they give their life to Jesus. You guys, I mean, there's lots of them. And I refuse to be defined, have that church be defined by Silver Spring. They're 3,000 miles away, and I just don't let them define it for me. I tell every baptism, you have as much right to define the church as those people do. 10-year-old that I baptized, he's just as much a member as Ted Wilson and has an equal vote. Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
I have another question. Can I go again?
Sure.
Thanks. How do you think the Adventist Church should change to deal with the problem of retaining its members? You've asked us that question, but I want to ask you guys.
Yeah, Jim, you want to take a shot at that?
You can go first this time.
Yeah, I am for listening posts. I texted you last week about we should set up a listening post. At one time, I was going to be a person in the conference. There was I was for a few months. My idea was to have listening posts all over the conference and get all kinds of ages and people together and listen well to them. And then try to do something about it and just say, I've written it down. We're going to have a committee. We're going to talk about that. We're going to find a way to deal with that. If we need a theology on climate change, then we should do that. If that would say to people, we are really listening to Jesus and we are going to do something about this in our world, I would go get that. Okay? I have a statement you talk about the politics. I have a statement by J.I. Packer on Christians and politics. It's one of the finest statements I've ever read. I emailed that to people last week and said, I agree with this. So I think we listen and we say, okay, what can we do about those things? And I would not rest until we had you nodding to say, okay, I'm proud of that. I'm really proud that we're doing that. After Dan, that's good.
All right, I want to interject really quickly though. I don't want to speak for Andrew, I'm speaking for me. Just looking, Dan, at what you have done and just you being a warrior for women's ordination, and then that story of when you were at Orangewood, I am already saying like, yeah, that is amazing. So I just want to acknowledge that.
And if I know something else to do, and we have it in our power to do it. I have gone to the Catholic huge ministry in Orange County where they take women who are in trouble and they have a system that takes them all the way from here to employment and safety but I mean, it's buildings and all kinds of stuff. And I said, how? I would love to know how to do that and do that. But some things I don't know how to do. I don't have the power. But I can make phone calls about kids that were not being treated right at the school.
Yeah.
And I have certainly made phone calls. We had a lady that got let go at Hinsdale Hospital in Chicago who had no support, no husband, no family, no kids, no relatives. And the hospital went and fought her unemployment. And I called the hospital and I said, we're a Christian hospital, Adventist. What do you want this lady to live on? This is the only safety net she has is unemployment to keep eating. And our Christian hospital is down in court fighting it. I said, is this the best we can do? Anyway, I got them to change that. So you stick your voice in where you get a chance, just say, okay, that's just wrong. That's not right. You got to say something because of Jesus. How to deal with trafficking everywhere. I don't know how to fully do that. How to make solar power everywhere in our state. That's not in my It's not in my hands to do. I vote for it. So I don't know if you want to help with that further. Yeah, but
Jim,
it's a very big deal to me to speak for do what I think Jesus would do in all those situations. Go ahead.
Jim, let's hear from you, Jim. How would you change the church to deal with the problem of losing members?
Keeping it simple, maybe too simple, because I tend to be a complicated person with all kinds of models and various things that all come together in my brain, but not everybody hears the complexity of life. Bottom line, Jesus said, "Come, follow me." The Adventist church didn't teach me or model how to follow Jesus. Your uncle Dan helped boatloads of Adventists discover what the devotional life and the joy of following Jesus more invented. And so he was big in my transformation. But I have seen so many Adventists who learn the 27 or the 13 and raise their hand and say, absolutely, I agree with them, but they don't know Jesus. We don't put them in relationships so that they learn how to walk and how to follow. Discipleship is not done on an intellectual basis. Discipleship is done on a relational basis. And in the Adventist church, we're talking a lot more about discipleship, but I don't see anything in terms of discipleship that it actually gets people into relationship. I have great troubles trying to get people to join a small group. Why do I need a small group? I have the truth.
That's sad.
And it's that mindset that I go, how in the world do we change this? And this is one of the reasons why I have been an advocate of church planting, because when you start a church, you get the DNA set, because get it set right for the right reasons. Don't have your DNA be because you're mad at the last church, because that will be the DNA of the new church, is we're mad at. And that is not following Jesus and the joy of understanding grace, of being in the family, of being the elder brother or the younger brother, and Jesus loves you both. Oh, what a radical concept. Okay. The prodigal son story is crazy. We do not agree with the prodigal son story in the Adventist church. And so I have this practice, and so the other churches in town here don't like me sometimes, because if they vote somebody out, they know immediately I'll vote them in. Okay? I will not have another church be able to destroy somebody because they did some behavior, and it's been babies, it's been whatever. We'll take you in immediately.
If your church disfellowships somebody, you will bring them back the next day.
My church never disfellowships anyone.
Yeah.
Never. Okay? If somebody is doing something radical, my question to them is, are you a radical disciple of Jesus Christ? If you don't want to be, then just let us know. We're not trying to get in your face and try and control you. If you don't want to be a disciple, just give me a letter. We'll quietly drop your name. That's it. Boom. And it doesn't go before any board. It doesn't go before. It's just quietly hand it to the clerk and say, take this person out. They don't want to be a disciple. It's done quietly. Okay?
You know this person, but in Chicago, where the head pharmacist and the number 2 pharmacist had an affair.
Oh, yes.
And we had a church board meeting, and after how many hours, one of our ladies said, if we can't disfellowship for this, what can we disfellowship for?
Nothing.
That's right.
Andrew?
So both of you guys have answered really beautifully about how you've individually chosen to emulate Christ-like behavior, which is certainly attractive and helps retain members, especially since you're not dismissing them overtly. But for a prospective audience of church leadership, so thinking of conference presidents, union presidents, conference workers, how would you recommend the organizational church change to deal with the problem of losing members? both of you have given personal examples, which are awesome, but talk to the conference presidents in the room, if you will. How would you change the church at their level? Or how would you suggest they change the church?
Some smarter people outside the Adventist church taught me when I was an administrator, look at what you count. What do you count?
What are they counting that's wrong?
No, what you count is what you consider important.
Right. So now I'm asking you, what do you think the conference is counting that is unimportant?
So we count baptisms. We don't count disciples. We don't count whether people are engaged and walking with the Spirit and experiencing the gifts of the Spirit or relying on God. We don't count that. We don't even ask that. We just count baptisms. And so Dan and I can tell you too many stories of swimming with the missionary, getting a t-shirt, getting a big feast, going to potluck and counting them as baptized. Okay? Too many stories. We count tithe. I get a report every month. One report I get from the office is money. Is that really the most important thing on this planet? No, it is not. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Okay, it is not money.
When we're talking about organizational language, though, we're talking about metrics like money. And I don't think any conference president or pastor believes in the promise of Christ to provide like God promises he provides for the sparrows, she provides for the sparrows. I don't think anybody has the pure faith of those Bible stories. So
why not?
Because life doesn't work that way, and God doesn't work that way.
Okay, so when I'm overseas and I find other missionaries, I say, so who's sponsoring you? And they go, no, nobody's sponsoring me. God called me and he said, go and I'll provide for you. And so I have run into missionaries all over the world who are there because God provides on a regular basis. Why is that not the DNA of Adventism? Here we're back to the DNA again, all right? And so our DNA is faulty at a very core level. Hear me clearly, power, turf, and control.
Just to finish that story, Jim invited me to speak for the self-supporting missionaries of Asia, 150 in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
Yes.
One of the coolest weekends I've ever spent in my life. Every meal was another mission story. And some of those are my friends for life now. They're just amazing.
And they are way more right-wing than I am, okay? They got upset with me because I said I was in favor of women's ordination, and they descended on me that weekend, Dan, okay? Anyway, so but God bless them. They are radically depending upon God to provide, and he does.
Airplanes and helicopters and an orphanage and
okay, he does.
Yeah. I love the stories you're sharing. Sorry, my sounded very cynical. I apologize for that coming through. Those individual stories and the amount of the individual stories, which seems to talk about some sort of larger effect that we can calibrate, are awesome. But when we're talking to conference presidents and union presidents and pastors in churches that have taxes and bills to pay, how do we, this is a rhetorical question, but it's worth asking to play devil's advocate. Is it really responsible and is it really realistic to live that way according to those expectations in a world that functions differently? That wasn't very eloquent. I hope what I was trying to say got across. It's a rhetorical question, but I think that's a question that we have to ask.
You're talking about living like George Mueller, where you're just out there by faith and the system doesn't provide you a check every 2 weeks.
Right. So it's fine to talk about individual missionaries, for instance. but when we're talking about changing the organizational structure of our church at large, our conferences and our unions, it's really, really difficult to say to a conference president, oh, everything's just going to work out, just trust in Jesus. That kind of fiscal irresponsibility gets people voted out instantly. Like, we would all, as soon as we change our mind frame, we would look at them and be like, they're crazy. They're not fit to lead because they're not interacting responsibly with the demands of the world on the organization. So yeah, I'm just not sure I'm following you on this.
I'll give you two examples that fit your model. The Adventist Church lost the Mary Kay Silver battle, the Pacific Press. You guys know about that? With the equal pay for equal work, you know. And this lady sued the church, and we lost back in the early 70s. And so the church now had to pay equal pay to all women in the country. But you go all over the world, they still don't do it. And I have been there in front of the women who can't pay their bills because they're not a head of a household. They don't have health insurance. They don't have school insurance for their kids because their husband's not an Adventist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, not working for the church. I have fought that everywhere. Women who don't get health insurance working for the church. And the leaders say, we would like to do it, Pastor Dan. But to take people who are at 60% and jump them to 100% would do what you're talking about. They would have to make a faith statement. The Adventist Church, most of the world, at least I know in Philippines and most of the countries, takes all the tithe out of their workers before they send a check out. They don't trust those pastors and teachers to actually pay tithe on their own. And they're so scared. That's one source of income that they can rely on. The tithe of their own workers, which they take it out before they even get it. So to have an act of faith, and I keep telling them, stretch out and seek. How can you ask them to be stewardship if you don't trust God to do that? But those are hard things.
So you guys all know Collins, Good to Great. You haven't read the book, Good to Great?
You read the book?
You need to read the book, okay?
I'll send you the cliff notes.
Also, you need to read the book, Deep Change, okay? Because you are asking questions about how an organization that finds itself being marginalized examines its core values and attempts to change. All right? And there are leadership books out there that have already identified, and my friend Karen Kress has her doctorate in how to help organizations change if they have the courage to do so. All right? Most do not. But if they have the courage, really the answer is to come back to this issue, and that is, are you making a person a radical disciple of Jesus Christ who knows that God will provide and does? And he does in their daily life, and they can tell other people what my wife and I call our hot tub stories, where God provides. God provides. Amazing, crazy stories. My wife gets hired in the Denver Public Schools that saved my retirement on the way to the airport when she'd given up, okay? Just crazy stories. And God provides. And so you take that through the rest of your life because you know that whether you're a conference president or wherever, God provides. Are you hearing God's voice in your life? Or is God's voice just in the Gospels and you don't hear him talking to you?
Amen.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's what I call the church.
I've played devil's advocate for a little bit, but now I want to agree with you.
Okay. Now we have 13 more minutes.
Sure, I'll be really quick. Just speaking directly to if there are any church leaders that are listening, I think the church is slowly dwindling and dying. We see that in regards to our academies, I think really strongly. Certainly in regards to the fiscal situation that COVID has put on the church, that financial reality of the church dwindling and dying has become apparent. And it would be better and more glorious and more Christ-like to go out in a bang, fulfilling the mission, than it would be to just erode away. So yeah, like Jim, I want to call those of you who wield the credit cards to radical faith, good luck. I like what you're saying, Jim, even though I think it's unrealistic. And that moment of faith and realism is a tension that we all live in.
Now, last time, I'm going to take you back to something you said last time. Last time, where we sort of stopped and dropped our jaws because you said, well, maybe we ought to just let it die. Do you remember saying that?
Not that specific instance, but that sounds like something I'd say. So sure.
Because I want you to unpack that. What do you mean by let it die? Because I have something to say in response that may echo what you're thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier just to let. Okay, I'll start over. I think, Jim, you've made clear, I certainly believe this as well, what I'm about to state. And I think most leaders would agree with me that the work of Jesus is separate from any church denomination or church structure. And understanding that and realizing that gives us permission to abandon things that are getting in the way of the work of Jesus. And if the church structure or the realities of where the church is at is getting in the way of the work of Jesus, then we should be willing to let it go, even though it's really hard, it's really scary, and it really sucks because that's our history and that's who we are. Sometimes we have to do it to get back on track. So in that sense, I'm okay with saying the church can die, and that's okay, because that will provide us an opportunity to reconcentrate and refocus. You said it yourself, Jim, or at least I think embodied the heart of what I just said when you were talking about church planting. Sometimes it's easier to just start a new church than it is to redeem an old one that has bad DNA or bad history or all that excess baggage. That's, I think, what I intended to say and mean last episode.
You know the story of Hezekiah destroying the bronze snake?
Yeah, the Old Testament has a lot of those.
Yeah,
reformulating religious observances.
And a guy preached a sermon, Haddon Robinson preached a great sermon on it. And he just said it was a good snake back when Moses was told to put it up on a pole. But now 700 years later, they're burning incense to it and worshiping it. And God tells Hezekiah, get it out, destroy it. In order for there to be a revival, that snake had to be destroyed, and certain things might have to be. And he specifically references, there were some conservatives that got mad. They say, you're destroying a snake that God told Moses to build. So there's going to be moments like that. Yeah.
Got to kill the sacred cows. But it sucks when the sacred cow is you. Ah!
Or you're attached to the sacred cow.
You're sitting on it.
I thought you were going to say something, Paige. No?
No, I am just enjoying hearing Andrew's thoughts.
Thanks.
So
and Jim's thoughts.
I will simply say an affirmation, and that is that what I discovered when I was in administration, and that is when you go into a church and you discover that a board is just fighting, and people are fleeing and leaving, and you go, what is going on here? Why is this? The best thing to do for the church is to have a good funeral. To say, God bless you, but this is not how we do church. And we're going to close this church so that we can start again. But we're going to ask people when we start again, why do you want to join this church? It's not just because your mother built this church, but because you want power, turf, and control. And too many Adventist churches, you just go in there and listen to what they discuss at a board meeting, and it's nauseating. Okay? Because there's plenty of time to talk about social justice issues out of the context of what Jesus said and what he called us to. It's incredible what happens in the local church or what doesn't happen.
Well, what do you put in your church board agenda now that's different?
That's a whole nother discussion, but I'll give you the short version. I'm doing exactly what I was experimenting with in Rocky Mountain, which should be no surprise to anybody, and that is we have a governance board. The governance board has created a boundary within which I have absolute freedom to operate as long as I don't go outside of the boundary and as long as things are moving forward. So I have a dashboard, leadership dashboard that I report in terms of how we're doing, red, yellow, green, and I tell them where the challenges are and what we're doing, and they look at it and go, yeah, go, do it. We do not discuss all these crazy little picky unit issues. I delegate responsibility and authority. In the Adventist Church, we don't delegate responsibility and authority. We delegate responsibility and the authority stays at the committee level. That's called slavery, excuse me, okay? It's inappropriate. We trust people. You guys are getting your professional degrees to go out and be pastors in churches where they don't trust you and they aren't going to give you responsibility or authority to do anything. And so every time you come to church board, you don't know whether it's going to get passed or who's going to come and what their agenda is. That's craziness.
Jim, don't cut this section of the podcast because Dan dropped, because what you're saying is really important and really meaningful.
Well, it's a whole
Just
issue.
FYI.
If you want the book, it's called Hit the Bullseye. Okay. All right. So we experimented with it and I got axed because it's not according to the church manual.
Jim, last week we were talking about constructing a church which is attractive enough for people to want to stay.
Yes.
And this week you seem to be advocating for a wholesale abandonment of the church because it's a system that doesn't work. What the heck happened? All these listeners are like, come on, man. This isn't.
Okay, so it is very true that I am radically disconnected to the institution because they're off someplace that God's not calling me to that. If God is calling them to that, I can respect that. But I'm not going to beat up on them. I'm done beating up on anybody. What I'm trying to say is, where is the radical, passionate calling of God on people's lives? That's what you build the church out of. You don't attack the institutional. If I'm attacking the institutional church, I'm sorry, because I really don't want to. I've got friends all over there, and they're doing their job. If God calls them to that, okay, good.
I think what you're expressing is exactly how a lot of my peers who have left the church feel as well. Yeah. We grew up with a lot of baggage with the Adventist church. We finally came to a place where we were able to let that baggage go. And now we can walk away completely just saying, best of luck. I'm going to go do what Christ is calling me to do, where Christ is calling me to do it, which just so happens to be outside of the church. So.
And I say, more power to you. How can I help?
Sure. Do you think Adventist conferences can say that? Seems how they're still listening.
Well, yes. And there are conference presidents, friends of mine, who are doing that. Now, they have to be more careful, but there are conference presidents who are hiring the risk takers, who are allowing people to do things outside the box, okay? And yes, they're my heroes because they recognize that it is the call of God. And in order to learn the language of the natives, you have to let a pastor do things differently. Yeah.
Yeah, let me send my resume.
You send me your resume, and if they contact me looking for someone like you, I will pass it on.
I don't have a resume right now, but thank you. Maybe I'll have one in a week.
Okay. All right. It's a disturbing time, but you talked about you hope that the Adventist last day events aren't upon us. I hope they're not either. I don't think they are because the world is becoming more secular and more unchristian than Christian. Okay. So I don't think God's going to come tonight. But I am not willing to just give up without telling the truth gently as I can and yet as clearly as I can that the church has simply wandered into an institutional gridlock.
Yeah. Jim, I've hit my exhaustion point now that it's
Yes.
11:30 here.
And Dan said that he would be back in a minute. He lost power, but we can wait just another minute to see if he comes. Paige, you haven't said anything in a while. Are
I've
you?
been enjoying what you and Andrew have been saying. I'm really glad that we decided to take this approach for this episode because I got to hear more of what you what's on your heart and what's on Dan's, and I really enjoyed that. I think earlier you said you referenced a church that you were at or maybe a conference you were at and you tried to do something and then it went really wrong and you had to get out of there. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah,
Can you
that's all my history. Yes.
can you like um give a very brief shortest version of that? So I am
All right.
interested.
Shortest version of my ministry is I was mentored by some of the best conference presidents who taught me that leadership is management. Okay. And I tried managing and hit a wall and started reading books and discovered leadership is not management. Management is important, but leadership is an entirely different whole discipline. All right. And so as I started reading those books, I went, wow, we need to start leading. And in order to lead, that's when we started playing with governance in order to have permission to lead, et cetera, rather than the micromanaging boards that we have in the church now. Okay. So we started doing this and we quickly realized that if you really take this and start empowering the local church, because I began to recognize that the role of the conference is a lowarchy to support the local church. It is not the local church that is trying to support all the various levels of the church. Okay. No, they exist as a lowarchy to support the local church. That's where discipleship happens. Well, that's heresy. All right. And I started getting in trouble. And I had some people who were protecting me for a while. And eventually, the conservatives who I love dearly, I used to be conservative, okay? I'm certainly not anymore. I'm a radical Jesus person. Where I'll just say this openly. In the Adventist church right now, because of the direction it's going, they've taken Ellen White and put her equal to and above Scripture. All right. And I have simply said, no, that's inappropriate. That is wrong. That is a form of cultism. All right. Well, you can imagine how those words went over with my conservative Adventist friends, and they said, well, then you're out of here. All right. And so I said, yeah, most probably. Okay. Because I'm not changing my position. And I still maintain that position. Ellen White was a great aid to the church, but she is not the ultimate authority on what the Bible says. She said, don't do that. But the Adventist church now is doing that. And that's the reason why we are stuck, frankly, is because the church has taken her and used her as a manipulation of control when she's a great blessing. I believe in spiritual gifts. So
I think, Jim, when you talk about the transition from a hierarchy to a lowarchy, you're really challenging the organizational Seventh-day Adventist Church. I think that is a great answer to some of the questions I was asking earlier. I remember you talking about it last week now and being really impressed as well. I think that's something everybody strives for in name, even if they don't have the language to call it that. Conferences obviously want to empower the local church and elect leaders to guide local churches and mentor and counsel and all of that stuff. But maybe the Adventist church needs to come to a reckoning with how its resources are being spent in regards to top-down leadership. Maybe that's an interesting and an important point to make regarding the health of the Adventist church and its chances for survival.
So read the book, Hit the Bullseye.
You keep referencing all these books. You need to send us a reading list. There are too many for me to remember.
You'll discover I'm a bookaholic.
Got you. I'm putting it back on you. You've referenced them, but I forget them. It's
Okay.
too late.
All right.
So
All right. I'll send you a list.
you send an email and
Me
then
too.
we'll see.
Yep. All right.
Jim,
Looks like we better. Andrew, why don't you have prayer for us? Because it looks like Dan's power went out for too long. Please.
Sounds good. I was about to say I'm falling asleep.
Yes. Okay, then Paige can pray if you're too sleepy.
Well, I just want to say a thank you to everybody who's listened to what we've had to say. It's been a pleasure being on, and it's not lost on me nor Paige that the time people are spending listening to this is a sacrifice that they've made. So,
and God is calling
thank
you
you.
guys. You are the leaders now. Dan and I are moving off the stage.
Okay.
Please pray for us.
Andrew, aren't you going to pray?
Heck no.
Okay, I'll pray. God, thank you so much for this time that we got to spend together this evening, talking about things that, really matter. We pray that as we go out into our own lives and do our own work, that we remain true to being true and radical followers of your son, Jesus. And we are thankful for the people who are tuning into this and for the larger community that we have in people who are trying to figure, these tough situations out. There's an age gap in the church. People are leaving. People want to stay. And so I want to say that I'm thankful for spaces like these where we can have open and honest conversations. Please bless each of us as we go out and to finish the rest of our weeks. And please be with Dan. He's not here with us right now, but I'm sure he's figuring out how to turn his power back on. Amen.
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 Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Jim.
It's a joy.